Do you believe Timmy, Ray, and Lorraine can come back if Betty and Larry move? Yes or no? Because for many people, this stopped being a curiosity a long time ago. It stopped being a viral moment. It stopped being shock content. It became something heavier, a quiet ache that never really goes away. You watched three vulnerable adults grow up on that porch. You watched them laugh. You watched them wave at cameras they didn't fully understand. You watched them exist in a world that didn't seem built for them. And then you watched them dissipate, separated, removed, protected, according to the system, but separated, according to the heart. Now in 2026, one idea keeps floating to the surface like a life raft people want to grab onto. If Betty and Larry just move, everything gets fixed. But here's the hard truth. A move changes the setting. It does not automatically change the standards. And if we actually care about Timmy, Ray, and Lorraine, not just emotionally, but responsibly, then we have to talk about what reunification usually requires in situations involving vulnerable adults. Not rumors, not wishful thinking. Conditions, verified housing, stability, consistent care, clear boundaries, protection from exploitation, oversight that can be documented. Because when the system separates people, it doesn't bring them back because someone misses them. It brings them back when risk is demonstrably reduced. And that is where this conversation begins. Let's say the quiet part out loud. People want them back because separation feels cruel. It feels like the final insult after a life that already looked hard. You watched Betty cry and say she missed them. You watched Larry look confused and angry. You watched a family that never chased attention become overwhelmed by it. So the emotional reaction makes sense. Of course people want a reunion. But systems that deal with vulnerable adults don't operate on emotion. They operate on risk assessment. They ask different questions than the public asks. The public asks, do they love each other? The system asks, can this be proven safe over time? And that difference matters, because comeback is not a single event. It's a spectrum. In situations like this, comeback can mean structured visits, supervised time together, gradual reintegration, conditional return, ongoing monitoring, or in some cases, permanent separation if risk cannot be mitigated. It depends entirely on whether specific standards are met. And this is the part many viewers don't want to hear. Relocation alone rarely triggers reunification. Relocation creates the opportunity to demonstrate change. That's very different. A new address does not automatically erase prior findings. A new house does not cancel documented concerns. It creates a testing ground. And when vulnerable adults are involved, the bar is high. Housing must be verifiably safe. Care must be demonstrably consistent. Boundaries must be enforceable. Oversight must be ongoing. And perhaps most important of all, proof must exist. Not promises. Proof. Now here's something else that matters in 2026. A lot of the details the public wants are not information that can ethically be shared. Adult protective matters, guardianship questions, care plans. These are typically confidential, which means silence from officials is not proof of wrongdoing, and lack of updates is not proof of conspiracy. It is often proof that vulnerable adults are being shielded from public scrutiny, and that creates tension. Because the internet demands instant clarity, while protective systems move slowly and privately. Families like the Whittakers get crushed in the middle of that tension. Public curiosity pulls one way, confidentiality pulls the other, and rumors grow in the gap. So here's the honest 2026 framing. If Betty and Larry move, That move is not a magic key. It is a step, a potential first condition, a chance to create an environment where return could even be considered. That means housing becomes the first real test, because in situations involving vulnerable adults, housing isn't symbolic. It's foundational. Let's talk about what that means in practical terms. Safe housing is not just a roof. It means functioning utilities, reliable heat in winter, running water, electricity, sanitation, working bathrooms, clean food preparation areas, structural safety, no fire hazards, no exposed wiring, no unstable floors, no pest infestations, no chronic sanitation breakdowns, and most importantly, the ability to maintain those conditions consistently. Not once, not for a week, over time, because the system does not measure whether you can fix something temporarily. It measures whether you can sustain safety. And this is where a move could matter in a very real way. A modern, stable home can provide reliable plumbing, safer heating systems, less structural instability, easier access for services, better sanitation control, reduced environmental stress. It can offer what policy documents often call environmental stability. And environmental stability is not cosmetic. It directly affects risk assessment. If a previous home was cited for hazards, fire risk, sanitation concerns, overcrowding, utilities, then relocation into a stable environment changes the baseline. It allows authorities to evaluate conditions fresh. But again, housing is the beginning, not the finish. A clean house that becomes chaotic after a month does not pass long-term review. A safe home on paper that lacks daily structure fails the sustainability test. And sustainability is the quiet word that decides everything. So the real question isn't, can they move? It's, can they sustain safe conditions under stress? Because vulnerable adults do not need a house. They need a stable ecosystem. And that ecosystem includes more than walls. It includes daily care routines, medical follow-through, food management, hygiene consistency, medication management if required, transportation reliability, supervision where needed, and emotional steadiness in the household. A move can make those things easier, but it does not automatically guarantee them. That's why reunification decisions don't hinge on a moving truck. They hinge on a documented care plan. And that's where we go next. Before we move into stability and consistent care in detail, answer this honestly in the comments. Do you believe housing is the most important condition for their return? Yes or no? And if not, what do you think matters more? If housing is the foundation, stability is the structure built on top of it. And this is where the conversation shifts from emotional to practical. Because when vulnerable adults are involved, stability is not a vibe. It's a measurable pattern. It's what happens on a random Tuesday in February when nobody is filming, nobody is visiting, nobody is donating, and nobody is arguing online. It's whether breakfast still gets made, whether medications are still taken, whether hygiene is maintained, whether appointments are kept, whether stress is managed without collapse. Stability is boring, and that's exactly why it matters. In cases like this, authorities do not look for a single good week. They look for repeatable routines. They look for evidence that care is not dependent on mood, money spikes, or outside attention. They look for systems inside the household. Who wakes up first? Who cooks? Who cleans? Who monitors? Who handles prescriptions? Who manages transportation? Who steps in if someone gets sick? What happens if the caregiver is overwhelmed? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Love does not automatically equal capacity. You can love someone deeply and still lack the infrastructure to meet their needs safely. And when adults are described as nonverbal, cognitively limited, or medically dependent, the standard rises. Consistency becomes protection. If Betty and Larry move in 2026, one of the first silent evaluations would be this. Has daily life become predictable? Predictable does not mean perfect. It means structured. The research around caregiver stress shows something important. Chronic stress erodes consistency. When a caregiver lives in constant chaos, constant financial strain, constant outside pressure, routines break down. Not out of cruelty, out of exhaustion. And exhaustion in a household with vulnerable adults becomes risk. So a move could reduce environmental stress. Modern plumbing reduces daily physical labor. Reliable utilities reduce crisis management. Safer neighborhoods reduce fear of intrusion. Less public exposure reduces emotional strain. Those changes are not cosmetic. They directly affect caregiver capacity. But here's the part that people overlook. A move also creates stress. Transitions disrupt routines. Familiar environments dissipate. Sleep patterns change. Sensory comfort shifts. Established habits reset. For individuals like Timmy, Ray, and Lorraine, who have lived in one place for decades, environmental disruption can be destabilizing. So relocation must be carefully managed. Because if the move creates instability, the evaluation resets. Which brings us to service engagement. One of the strongest indicators of readiness for reunification is consistent engagement with services. That means home health support if needed, medical follow-through, mental health evaluations when appropriate, routine check-ins, documentation of compliance, openness to oversight, not defensiveness, not secrecy, cooperation. If Betty and Larry move, the question becomes, can services access the home easily? Can caseworkers enter without obstruction? Can therapists or nurses perform evaluations? Can follow-up appointments be scheduled and kept? Is transportation reliable? Distance matters more than people realize. Living in a remote area with limited access to services creates logistical barriers. Living closer to medical infrastructure reduces response time. In emergency care, minutes matter. In medication continuity, missed refills matter. In chronic conditions, monitoring matters. And this is where proximity can change outcomes. If a new location allows shorter drives to clinics, faster pharmacy access, reliable emergency response, easier home visit scheduling, that strengthens the case for stability. But again, proximity alone is not enough. Engagement must be active. There's another layer that complicates this family's situation in particular. Public exposure. The Whittakers have not lived a private life. They have lived under a microscope. Constant filming. Strangers visiting. Donation campaigns. Conflicts between creators. Online arguments. Accusations. Investigations. That kind of environment generates chronic stress. Chronic stress destabilizes care. If relocation reduces public intrusion, it may indirectly improve daily stability. But the move must include boundaries. Because if the new address becomes public, if filming resumes without structure, if outsiders regain unrestricted access, then instability returns under a different roof. This is where routine meets protection. A stable environment requires controlled access to the home, clear visitor policies, no unauthorized filming, no financial entanglements without oversight, no single gatekeeper controlling everything, multiple trusted contacts, shared responsibility, transparent communication, Documented financial processes. Because exploitation thrives in isolation and chaos. And if a move reduces environmental chaos but leaves financial and access chaos untouched, the core risk remains. Now let's talk about emotional stability. Caregivers under scrutiny experience something called anticipatory stress. It's the feeling that something might happen at any time. A knock on the door, a call from authorities, a viral accusation, a sudden visit. That state of alertness erodes calm, and calm is essential in households with cognitively vulnerable adults. If relocation brings predictability, less public pressure, reduced scrutiny, clear boundaries, it could lower anticipatory stress. Lower stress improves decision-making, improves patience, improves consistency, improves care quality, but only if the new structure is protected. Now we arrive at one of the hardest realities. Stability must be sustained long enough to be verified. That means weeks, months, possibly longer. Demonstrated consistency, not reactive improvement, not a burst of order, not performative compliance. Documented routine. Because oversight doesn't disappear after a move. It intensifies. Frequent home visits, monitoring, re-evaluation, case reviews, follow-ups. And here's where public expectation must adjust. If Betty and Larry move, and the public sees nothing happen immediately, that does not mean nothing is happening. Systems move through process, and process protects vulnerable adults from impulsive decisions. Reunification is rarely sudden. It's gradual, structured visits, supervised interaction, evaluation of adjustment, monitoring of environmental stability, and only after consistent safety is proven does the question of full retain get seriously evaluated. That's the framework, not because the system lacks compassion, but because it operates on risk reduction. So let's summarize this section clearly. A move could support reunification if it leads to documented stable housing, reduced caregiver stress, active service engagement, reliable routines, controlled access, sustained compliance, transparent oversight. But a move without structure changes very little. In fact, it can create new vulnerabilities. The public often imagines relocation as a turning point. In reality, it is a probationary period, an opportunity to demonstrate change, not proof of change itself. And here's the question that matters next. Even if housing and stability improve, even if routines hold, even if services are engaged, what about protection from exploitation? Because this family's vulnerability has not only been environmental, it has been social. In Part 3, we examine oversight, boundaries, and what must exist to prevent a repeat of past chaos. Before moving on, answer this. Do you think stability matters more than housing? Or is oversight the real deciding factor? Comment one word, housing, stability, or oversight, and explain why. If housing is the foundation and stability is the structure, then oversight is the lock on the door. And in 2026, oversight is not optional. It is the condition that determines whether a move becomes protection or simply a relocation of risk. Because the Whittaker family's vulnerability has not existed in isolation. It has existed in public. Filming, donations, strangers arriving, conflicting narratives, online battles, allegations, arrests, investigations. That environment does not disappear just because a new lease is signed. It follows attention. So if Betty and Larry move, the first question the system will quietly evaluate is this. Has the protective perimeter improved? Protective perimeter means who has access to the home, who controls communication, who handles money, Who speaks publicly? Who authorizes filming? Who represents the family? Who makes decisions when outsiders show up? Because when vulnerable adults are involved, access equals power. And power without oversight creates opportunity for exploitation. The research around exploitation of vulnerable adults consistently identifies 3 repeating risk factors: isolation or restricted transparency, financial control by a single individual, lack of third-party monitoring. When those factors align, abuse becomes easier to hide. And here's the uncomfortable reality. Even help can become control. A person who says, "I'll handle everything," may not be malicious, but if they become the only gatekeeper, the only communicator, the only financial manager, the only voice, that concentration of authority becomes a risk. A move in 2026 could break old patterns. It could interrupt access. It could reset boundaries. It could reduce casual intrusion, but it can also create a vacuum. And vacuums attract new power structures. If one person becomes the sole controller of the new location, the sole handler of finances, the sole contact with services, then the structure becomes fragile again. Oversight prevents that. Oversight means multiple verified contacts, documented care plans, transparent financial management, controlled communication standards, defined visitor policies, service provider visibility, legal clarity. Let's talk about financial oversight specifically. The Whittakers have experienced public fundraising. They have experienced donation campaigns. They have experienced allegations of misuse. They have experienced at least one law enforcement action related to financial exploitation claims. Whether those claims result in convictions or not is a legal matter, but the presence of investigation alone changes the standard. In 2026, any future reunification plan would likely require clear separation between personal accounts and donation accounts, documented financial tracking, transparent accounting of expenses, no private, unverified fundraising, possibly third-party management of funds, receipts, paper trails, because financial ambiguity invites scrutiny, and scrutiny invites delay, and delay prevents return. Now let's address public exposure. The Whittaker family became a global spectacle. Strangers visited, content creators filmed, clips circulated, arguments exploded, narratives formed. For vulnerable adults who cannot consent clearly, that exposure becomes ethically complex. Oversight in a relocation scenario would likely include restricted filming policies, clear consent standards, no monetization without documented authorization, no surprise content, no live drop-ins, controlled digital presence, limited public updates. Why? Because the internet has a memory longer than any lease. A new house can become a new target. If relocation details leak, if the address spreads, if speculation resumes, the protective value of the move collapses, which leads to monitoring. Oversight does not mean distrust. It means verification, frequent home visits, unscheduled check-ins, routine service assessments, caseworker engagement, documentation reviews. The goal is not punishment. It is sustainability. And here's something people often misunderstand. Privacy and oversight can coexist. The public may not receive details. The public may not receive addresses. The public may not receive legal documentation. That does not mean oversight is absent. In cases involving vulnerable adults, confidentiality protects dignity. If the public sees less, that may mean protection is working. Now let's discuss social boundaries. The research describes prior issues including harassment, filming pressure, and public interference. Relocation can provide social shielding, but shielding only works if enforced. No open-door policy, no uncontrolled access, no constant visitors, no random drop-ins, no unsupervised third-party involvement, because unstable social environments destabilize care. When multiple outsiders influence daily life, routine fractures, oversight restores focus. Now consider this. Reunification is not simply about bringing people back. It is about ensuring they do not return to the same vulnerabilities. If exploitation risks are not mitigated, reunification stalls. If unauthorized filming continues, reunification stalls. If financial ambiguity remains, reunification stalls. If service providers cannot verify safety, reunification stalls. Oversight accelerates progress. Lack of oversight prolongs separation. And here is the central tension in 2026. The public wants transparency. The system prioritizes confidentiality. That gap creates suspicion. But suspicion is not evidence. If a move occurs and no reunion happens immediately, it may reflect procedural caution, not obstruction. If updates are limited, that may reflect privacy safeguards, not secrecy. And this is where responsible observation matters. What do we watch for? Not rumors, not social media claims, not unverified sightings. We watch for credible signals, verified housing stability, confirmed service engagement, reduced public chaos, less filming, structured communication, law enforcement resolution, clear boundaries, not spectacle. Spectacle disrupts oversight, and oversight is what makes reunification possible. Let's pause on something important. A move can reduce environmental risk. Stability can reduce daily stress. Oversight can reduce exploitation. But none of those guarantee return, because the deciding factor is cumulative proof. Proof that safety is consistent, care is sustainable, boundaries are enforceable, authority is clear, finances are transparent, monitoring is welcomed. Proof over time, which leads us to the hardest part. Time. Oversight requires patience. Reunification requires sustained compliance. The public wants a moment. The system requires a pattern. And patterns are built slowly. So if Betty and Larry move in 2026, the real shift will not be visible in viral footage. It will be visible in routine. Routine that holds for months. Routine that withstands stress. Routine that survives without chaos. Because that is what oversight is measuring. And now the question becomes even sharper. If housing improves, if stability improves, if oversight strengthens, what ultimately decides whether Timmy, Ray, and Lorraine come back? That answer lives in part 4. Before moving forward, answer honestly. Is oversight the most important condition? Or do you believe stability matters more? Comment one word: housing, stability, or oversight, and tell me why. If housing is verified, if stability becomes routine, and if oversight is structured and documented, then the final condition becomes the most sensitive one of all: legal authority and consent. This is where hope meets paperwork. And paperwork, in 2026, is what decides whether reunification is possible, not online pressure, not viral campaigns, not emotional appeals. When vulnerable adults are removed from a home environment, the system does not simply hold them informally. There are legal frameworks involved: protective placements, guardianship questions, capacity evaluations, consent determinations, court oversight, protective service plans. The public may not see those documents, but they exist. And reunification requires alignment between the family's new conditions and whatever legal posture currently governs Timmy, Ray, and Lorraine. Here's what that usually means in practice. If a guardianship order exists, any return requires court approval. If protective supervision exists, return requires compliance with conditions. If the adults were deemed unable to consent to certain decisions, then capacity evaluations may need to be revisited. None of that moves quickly, and none of that responds to public opinion. The uncomfortable truth is this: even if Betty and Larry create the safest possible home, even if they establish stability and oversight, legal authority must still authorize return, and authorization requires evidence, not promises, evidence. Proof that the new environment mitigates prior risks. Proof that protective conditions are enforceable. Proof that services will remain engaged. Proof that exploitation risks are minimized. Proof that no single gatekeeper controls access. And here's something that makes this more complex than most families. The Whittakers are no longer anonymous. Their situation involved public attention, fundraising, allegations of misuse, and at least one criminal prosecution tied to alleged financial exploitation in 2026. That changes the scrutiny level. It means agencies are not simply evaluating a home. They are evaluating a public case. Public cases carry reputational risk for agencies. If reunification occurs and something goes wrong, it becomes headline material. So agencies tend to err on the side of caution. That caution can feel slow. It can feel unfair. It can feel like punishment. But from a systems perspective, it is risk containment. Now let's talk about consent. Timmy, Ray, and Lorraine have been described publicly as severely limited in communication and capacity. In cases involving adults with diminished capacity, the system must answer specific questions. Do they understand their living situation? Can they express preference? Are they capable of consenting to return? Are they able to report mistreatment? If capacity is limited, protective mechanisms stay in place. That means even if emotionally they want to return, and we don't know that, the decision may not be solely theirs. And this is where viewers sometimes feel anger, because it feels like autonomy is being denied. But autonomy requires capacity, and when capacity is compromised, protection increases. It's not meant to be cruel. It's meant to reduce harm. Now let's bring this back to relocation. If Betty and Larry move into verified, safe housing with structured oversight and documented care plans, here's what it realistically creates. Not automatic return. Eligibility for review. That distinction matters. Eligibility for review means agencies can begin evaluating whether the conditions that justified removal have been sufficiently corrected. Corrected, not temporarily improved. Corrected in a way that is sustainable. If that review process begins, it may look like home inspections, caseworker reports, medical evaluations, care plan audits, interviews, follow-up visits, gradual visitation trials, and only after sustained compliance would full return even enter discussion. This is not dramatic. It is procedural. Now here is the quiet tension. The public wants resolution. The system wants risk reduction. Those goals are not identical. And this is why a move is powerful but insufficient. It resets the board. It does not end the game. Now let's address something many people ask. Why can't they just go back if they want to? Because vulnerable adult cases do not operate like standard housing disputes. When removal occurs under protective authority, return is conditional. And conditions are evaluated against documented risk factors. Those risk factors in public reporting included housing instability, sanitation concerns, fire damage, financial exploitation allegations, public exposure, unauthorized filming, boundary failures. If relocation addresses those factors comprehensively, review becomes possible. If relocation addresses only some, return becomes unlikely. And this is the part people ignore. Time consistency is weighted heavily. A week of stability proves little. A month proves little. Agencies look for patterns across time. Which brings us to monitoring. Monitoring is not distrust. Monitoring is evidence accumulation. Each successful check-in becomes a data point. Each stable month becomes a data point. Each documented service visit becomes a data point. Reunification requires enough data points to reduce perceived risk below threshold. And thresholds in public cases are higher. Now let's talk about the emotional cost. Betty and Larry are aging. If they relocate, the effort required to rebuild structure will be significant. Housing logistics, service coordination, financial organization, legal navigation, monitoring compliance, all while carrying emotional strain from separation. That is not easy. But here's the key. The system evaluates capability under stress, because stress is when breakdown occurs. If stability holds under stress, confidence increases. If instability resurfaces, review pauses. And this is where we shift to the most uncomfortable truth. Even if everything is done correctly, return is not guaranteed. Because agencies also consider long-term sustainability. Is the caregiver's health stable? Is the environment maintainable without constant crisis? Is support diversified? Are there contingency plans? If Betty's health declines, if Larry's capacity diminishes, if external pressures increase, the calculus changes. Reunification is not just about today. It is about viability over years. Which leads to one final question before we move to the conclusion. What is the non-negotiable condition? Housing alone is not enough. Stability alone is not enough. Oversight alone is not enough. Legal authority alone is not enough. Reunification requires all of them working together. And that is why a move is powerful. Because it is the only condition that can influence all categories simultaneously. It can improve housing. It can improve stability. It can strengthen oversight. It can clarify legal engagement. But only if done deliberately. So now the real question becomes even sharper. If they move, will the structure be built carefully? Or will it be rushed to satisfy public emotion? Because rushed solutions collapse. Deliberate ones endure. In Part 5, we bring this together. Before we continue, answer clearly. If you had to protect only one condition first, would it be housing, stability, oversight, or legal clarity? Comment one word, because the answer reveals what you believe truly brings people home. In 2026, the question is no longer emotional. It is structural. Can Timmy, Ray, and Lorraine come back if Betty and Larry move? Yes, but only if the move becomes more than a change of address. Return requires verified safe housing that stays safe over time. It requires consistent, documented care that does not collapse under pressure. It requires clear legal authority, not confusion. And it requires oversight strong enough to prevent exploitation from re-entering through a different door. A relocation can create the opportunity for reunification. It cannot guarantee it. The system will not respond to nostalgia. It will respond to proof. If proof accumulates, safe utilities, stable routines, enforceable boundaries, structured monitoring, then review becomes realistic. If proof does not accumulate, then separation may continue, even if it feels cruel. So the real condition is not simply move. It is sustainable protection. Now answer honestly. If you could protect only one foundation first, safety, stability, oversight, or legal clarity, which one would you choose? Comment one word and explain why. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.